Hi everyone, Crista Cowan here with another episode of The Barefoot Genealogist. Today we are talking about storytelling. Storytelling is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. I was raised by a mother who is a storyteller. I have a grandmother who is still a wonderful storyteller. Sometimes she'll tell the same story 2 or 3 times in a conversation, but she's a great storyteller. And of course, as a genealogist, part of my role is to be the keeper of those stories, to make sure that those stories are told, to make sure that these people are not forgotten. Now, as I was putting together today's presentation, I discovered that I had way more material than we have time for in our 20 or 30 minutes together today. And so I'm starting to develop this probably as a conference presentation that will be maybe an hour and 10 minutes long. And in the future, I may do it as a full hour-long webinar, just because there's some really great information. And I think it's really important that you have the confidence that you need to be able to tell your family stories. So I've narrowed it down today to just, I think 4 is where I landed, 4 tips, really specific tips. We'll go over each of them, and I hope that you'll be encouraged by the time we're done to be telling your family stories, maybe more frequently, and maybe with just some more interest than you may have had the tools to share before. So with that introduction, let's go ahead and dive in. We're going to start with something that I've talked about before, but as we start to tell our family stories, becomes even more critical. And that is, I would encourage you to develop the habit of writing while you research your family history. Now, I'll show you here in just a minute what that looks like for me, but we get so excited about digging into the records and connecting with census records and attaching them and looking for a birth record or a marriage record and attaching it. And we build these really great connections in our family tree with these records, but the records themselves tell a story. And so I would encourage you to capture that story while you are looking at that record. Not only will it make you a better researcher, but it helps you to tell the story a little bit better. So I've shown this to you before. If you're new, you probably haven't seen it. So this is how I do this, okay? I use Family Tree Maker, and I have it synced with my online tree on Ancestry.com. This is my great-grandfather. He died before I was born, and so I never knew him. But my mother, of course, knew her grandfather and has some wonderful stories about him. Let me close this and give ourselves some more screen room here. And here are the notes that I have made about his life as I have researched, okay? So, for example, I found him in the 1910 census, and there is my note about the 1910 census, what he did for a living, what the census explained about how long he'd been married, who was enumerated in the household. And you can see I've done that here then for every census. Here's 1920 and 1930 as well. Now, I haven't been able to find him in the 1900 census or in the 1940 census, and so I've made a note and bolded it to myself there. So this is kind of like my working research as well. And I haven't found his World War I draft card yet, so I've got a note there about that I need to go do that. Some of this is stuff that I just haven't been able to find. So, for example, I have not been able to find him in the 1900 census. I've looked. I haven't looked for the 1918 World War I draft card or the 1940 census yet. So those are just notes to myself or reminders to myself to do that. Now, if you scroll down a little bit here in my notes, you're going to see a couple of things. Not only have I transcribed those records, but I've also transcribed information out of personal records. So we have a family Bible that is in the possession of some of my mother's cousins, and we've transcribed the information out of that family Bible about his baptism. This is a note from my mother who told me information about her grandfather's funeral. She remembered some information, and so I recorded that, found an entry on Find a Grave, and then an obituary, and I just copied and pasted the transcription of that obituary. Now, down here at the bottom, I've started making what are called personal notes about my grandfather, my great-grandfather, things that I want to know more about him. Not just what the records tell me, but what other stories are available. So one of the things that I know about him just from spending time with my mom and her mom and my aunts and uncles, is that my great-grandfather had a nickname for every one of his children and every one of his grandchildren. And so I want to find out what those nicknames were, right? I think it might provide me with a little bit of insight into him as a person, to learn what he called his children and grandchildren, how he viewed them, how he connected with them. And so I have this goal here. I have this little personal note here to myself to find out what each of those nicknames were and to write up a little story about that. My mom has told me a story for years about how he used to roll his own cigarettes and how sometimes he would have the grandchildren help him. And so I have a note here about that so that I can remember to capture that story from my mother so that I can get her version of that story. So this is just how I do this. I keep track of information as I go, and then I add a personal notes section, and we could look at any number of people in my family tree, and you'll see a very similar situation here. Sometimes it's people who are known to people who are still living, but sometimes it's people who are long, long, long gone. So if I go way back in my family tree here, one of my favorite ancestors is this woman, Maggie Lawrence here. She is my 6th great-grandmother. Of course, nobody living still knows her, but there are still stories to be told. And so as I have researched her life, I have typed up information or copied information that I can then use to tell her story. So here I have a copy of the record from England when she was imprisoned. She was then sent to the United States on an indenture ship, on a convict ship. She became pregnant by the man who bought her indenture, had 2 children by him. I have in his notes, I have a copy of his will where he actually mentions his illegitimate children but does not mention their relationship to him. So I've started to collect information that will then allow me to tell their story or to record their story. And even if I never get around to writing it, I've got these notes here. So anybody who comes after me could come in here and could say, here's the information that we know about this person because of the information that I've collected over the years. So that's my first tip, and I can't emphasize it enough. It's why I spent so much time on it, but develop the habit of writing while you research, even if it's just transcribing the documents so that you get the story or start to understand the context of their lives, but also make notes to yourself. Make notes to yourself about, what other things you need to research, what else you would like to learn more about. Keep some kind of a running to-do list. I prefer to keep it at a person level, but you can keep a master list of some sort. I know Family Tree Maker allows for a master to-do list. There's also a to-do list on Ancestry.com that you can use for that. So write as you go, okay? Tip number 2, I would encourage you to read great stories and listen to great storytellers. Like I said, I was raised in a family of storytellers, and I can tell a story probably as well as just about anybody, but I still learn so much. I probably read at least a book a month, and sometimes they're historical fiction, sometimes like these. This is a true story set in the 19th century. This is a true story. Of course, this is a true story. There's dozens, hundreds of books available. And one of the challenges with true stories is that it's a little different than fiction. Is it's not like you go out and you find your favorite author and you read lots of what they've written, because oftentimes these true stories are these labors of love that people pour their whole lives into studying to be able to tell this one story. And so here are just a few of the books that I'm familiar with. There are so many more, and I try to read one a month. Don't discount children's books. So this book I just find delightful. It's called Mary Walker Wears the Pants, and it's about a woman in the Civil War who was a doctor, and it's a children's story. It's written at that level. And so think about your audience when you start thinking about how you're going to tell your family story. You don't have to write the great American novel. You don't have to write a book that takes your whole life to write. Maybe you just write a story about an ancestor that is, just a few pages long and written to an audience of, your 8, 9, 10-year-old grandchildren. They're going to be captivated by those stories and drawn into family history because of that. And I think that that's a really excellent way for you to dip your toe in the storytelling waters too. Tell them those stories and then capture them. Also, listen to great storytellers. Sid Lieberman, if you had the opportunity to either attend or to watch the it's captured on rootstech.org, the Roots Tech conference in February, March, whenever it was, just a few weeks ago. Sid gave one of the keynote addresses, and he is a master storyteller. And in that address, he talked about he didn't just tell stories, he talked about how to tell stories. And so if you haven't had the chance to watch that yet, I would encourage you to do that. You can go to rootstech.org, and it'll be right there on that homepage as one of the keynote addresses, Sid Lieberman. But he is just one of many, many, many wonderful storytellers. I remember being at a genealogy conference in Tennessee a couple of years ago, and for one of the evening activities, they invited a storyteller and a folk musician to come, and I was just delighted with the stories they told and the way in which they told those stories, because my family, a lot of them are from that region, and I didn't know a lot about the stories of Appalachia, and so it was really great to be able to listen to them. I would encourage you to Google storytelling festivals and see if there are some in your area or in places where you might have family or can travel to. We have a major storytelling festival here. It's the Timpanogos Storytelling Festival every year. It's over Labor Day weekend, and there are just amazing, amazing storytellers that come from all over the world, and some of them are funny, and some of them are sad, and some of them are telling stories at a children's level. Some of them are clearly telling stories at an adult level, but all of them have mastered that craft. And you don't have to become an expert storyteller, but there are always things to learn and to just absorb from listening to great storytellers or from reading great stories. So I would encourage you to spend some time doing that. Not only that, it also helps you learn about history. One of the things that I love about well-told stories is that they don't just connect you with the human experience or with your ancestors, that they also connect you with places and times in history. And the more I learn about those things, then the better researcher I am, the better genealogist I am, the better I'm able to tell my own family stories. Okay, my next tip for you, we're on to number 3, and I think we're doing okay for time here, is to tell the story, right? Don't be so concerned about writing it or creating a book or whatever, right? Just tell the family stories. Tell them out loud. Tell them to your family members. Share them around the dinner table. At a family reunion, we had a practice at our family reunion for years where one person every year would come prepared with a story about one of the founding members of this family. So it was a family reunion for my grandmother's grandparents and all of their children and grandchildren and so on. And so every year somebody would come prepared to tell a story about one of the children from that original family, people that many of us never had the opportunity to know. And so they would not just tell us about their life, but tell us sometimes little vignettes or little example stories from their life that gave a glimpse into their personality. And I always loved that part of the family reunion, was that storytelling part. As I mentioned, my grandmother will tell stories over and over, and I've learned to kind of direct that storytelling. I'll ask her questions, tell me about the time, tell me about how you met Grandpa, or tell me about the time you were riding your horse down the canal in Los Angeles, or tell me about when you found out your sister was getting married. Or one of my favorites is when she found out my parents were getting married. She thought they were far too young, and she just tells that story with delight that she was so against it, and yet here they are, 43 years later, still going strong. So tell the stories. One of the things that you'll discover is that you'll get better at telling the story, and I don't mean embellishing the story, and I certainly don't mean changing the facts, but you'll find that you get better and more comfortable telling the story as time goes on. You'll find that as you tell that story, family members will ask questions, which has the double effect of getting them interested, but it also helps you know where your holes are in the story. Where do I need more information to be able to tell this story or record this story in a way that will last? And then once you're comfortable telling that story, record yourself and then transcribe what you've recorded, because if you just told that story a million times but you haven't written it down anywhere, it might be lost, and we don't want to lose these stories. That's the whole point, is preserving them and sharing them. And so I've got a couple of images here on the screen that just to kind of get your mind going. Most cell phones today have some kind of a digital recorder built into them. Use that. You don't have to get fancy. I remember setting up tape recorders and all sorts of things to record stories from my family members, but now I can just set my cell phone down on my grandmother's meal tray and let her just talk, and it records that, it captures that. And then you can take that information and you can transcribe it. One of the things that you can also do, there are programs, this is Evernote, there are other programs that will do this as well, though. You can talk and it will transcribe it for you. So as you talk, it actually is typing out the information on the screen automatically, and then you can export that to a Word document and clean it up and format it, and you're done. And it just takes, for a 2 or 3 minute story or a 5 or 10 minute story, it's not going to take more than 20 or 30 minutes to do that. One of the things that my mother's been doing is she's been writing her life history, and I'm not exactly sure of all of the details of how she does it, but I do know that she writes a little bit every day, rather than getting overwhelmed with the thought of writing a whole lot, or rather than getting overwhelmed with the thought of writing your life story, or having to sequester yourself in a room for months on end to do that. She just writes a little bit every day, and she writes very specific little stories or little vignettes. I love that word. Just little glimpses into certain events in her life that, when strung together, give us this really beautiful picture of who she was and how she became the woman that we know. And so do this. Be willing to do this in just little bite-sized pieces, but tell the stories, record the stories, and then get them written down so that they're preserved. Even if you don't want to share them right now, at least make sure they're preserved. Okay, and then my final piece of advice, and I cannot stress this enough, is don't wait. One of the things that I hear so often when I'm talking to people is they say, oh, well, I just need to finish researching this family, or I just need to, wait until I retire, or there's always some excuse. And if you make writing your family stories part of your family history process, you're going to discover that you don't have to wait. So one of the things that I have done is, when I find a record, sometimes if I've got a full story to go with it, I'll write it up, and then I'll publish that. And so sometimes it's just one piece of information. I'll publish it to my blog, or I'll publish it, I'll email it out to my family members, or there's just so many opportunities to share that information. I was discussing this on one of our message boards on Facebook and reading through some of your comments, and one of the comments that came across was a woman who said that for Christmas one year, she gave her mother the gift of family history. And what that meant was, she didn't just give her everything at once or everything as a gift. It was kind of like a gift of the month club. She sent her for the next year a set or a page of family stories every month. So every month, this mother had to look forward to receiving a story from her daughter, and every month this daughter knew she had a story to tell. And so rather than getting overwhelmed with the thought of trying to get something completed for a, family reunion or a holiday gift or a birthday gift or a milestone anniversary or whatever, she was just telling the stories 1 month at a time. And then of course, after a year of that, you've got enough that you can bind them and put them together and now maybe share them with the rest of the family. So don't wait. There are a lot of different ways that you can share these stories, a lot of different tools. If you're not familiar with my canvas on Ancestry.com, you can find it here under this Publish button. When you click Publish, it will take you to our My Canvas product, and I can come in here and I can see different kinds of books I can create, and it'll do this all automatically for you based on the information you have in your family tree. So for example, if I was interested in telling that story about my great-grandfather and his life and the nicknames he had for all of his children, I can do that on a page or two. But I can also create this, what is called a descendant tree book, where it starts with him and it shows all of his children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And I can just push the button and it will automatically import all of that information out of my family tree. And now, instead of just a 2 or 3 page book or 2 or 3 page story about his, the nicknames he had for his children and why he called them that, I also now have a family history chart. I have attached census records. I have pictures. I have anything that I want to share. And now I can then have that book available to give as a gift to my cousins, to my mom, to her sister, to their cousins, because all of us in the family are part of this story as well. All just stemming from one little story and a click of a button out of my Family Tree Maker software. So I would encourage you not to wait. Let's just review really quickly as we wrap up here. Develop the habit of writing as you research your family history. It makes it easier to tell the story. It makes it easier for you to see the story. It also helps you keep track of where you might need to collect additional stories. Get in the habit of reading great stories and listening to great storytellers. Make that some kind of a part of your routine. Like I said, I try to read one nonfiction historical book a month. Sometimes, some months I'm more successful than others. And then tell the story. Tell the story out loud often to your family. Ask them for feedback. Listen to what questions they ask. And then record that story and transcribe what you've recorded. And then the final piece of advice, of course, is do not wait. Don't wait until it's all done. Don't wait until you have time in your life. You will never have time. But these stories need to be told. Not only do they need to be told, they need to be preserved. We are not just the storytellers, we are the story keepers. I get really emotional about that because I feel really strongly about it. Those of us who have felt drawn into family history, not everybody in your family is interested, and sometimes you start talking about the hours you spend into the wee hours of the morning doing family history research, and they really could not care less. They just don't even understand the obsession or the passion that we feel for this. But we start telling family stories, and their ears perk up, and sometimes their eyes light up. Sometimes they recognize pieces of themselves in these ancestors who've gone before, and we are the guardians of those stories. We are the ones who have the capacity and the interest and the ability to share those stories with the rest of the family and make sure that those people who've gone before us are remembered and that their stories are told. That is all I have prepared for you today. If you are watching this live, of course, I will be available on chat immediately following today's presentation. If you're watching an archived version of this, feel free to leave a comment or send an email with any questions. You can check our schedule on Facebook for upcoming events for the rest of the month. And I am already, because it's almost the middle of the month, working on the schedule for May. So if you have specific topics you'd like to see addressed, please feel free to email me as well, and we'll see if we can't work that into the May or June schedule of video presentations. Until next time, this is Crista Cowan. Have fun climbing your family tree.